welcome to your go-to Detroit Pistons podcast, The Pistons Pulse, co-hosted by me, Bryce Simon of Motor City Hoops, a former D1 Hooper and current teacher, husband, and father of 3 amazing kids.
And I'm Omari Sanko for the second Pistons beat writer for the Detroit Free Press.
And of course, we're always blessed to be joined by our producer, Wes Davenport, which if you are not listening to the Pin Down over on the Detroit Bad Boys YouTube with Blake Silverman and Wes, you guys need to do that. They just released this really cool thing where you can call in a number and you can leave your question through that. They'll play it live on their show. So really cool idea from Wes and Blake over there doing some really good stuff. So I know there's tons of Pistons content out there. We appreciate our listeners here, but our listeners should also be their listeners. And speaking of our listeners, Omari, we do get to read the most recent review we got over on Apple. This is from the other Sean. So I assume this isn't Sean Corp, which means Sean Corp's pretty famous if he needs somebody to say he's the other one. This person says, easily the best part of this season, Bryce and Omari got me through the roughest, all uppercase, season of my life. They don't sugarcoat things when they're just no good news, but they also don't go off the rails complaining about it. They offer a ton of insight and 2 are the most entertaining sports podcasters I've listened to. Highly recommend. Pretty good review there for us, Omari.
Yeah, I'll take that. Appreciate that, other Sean. Yeah, I mean, it was a tough season, we said it before, but, just the amount of people who were still tapping in every single week with us. But even on Twitter, it was like the 81st game, like a Friday night, and I still have people in my mentions talking about the game. Just like, if y'all don't go outside and do something else, like, why are you tweeting at me at 10 p.m. on a Saturday? Like, Pistons fans are dedicated. So, again, we appreciate everybody who stuck with us through this past season. And other Sean, I think we're talking about way more fun stuff now end of the offseason. So, hope to keep you around.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, we appreciate all of you watching on Twitter, on YouTube. Hit like, subscribe, leave ratings, review, whatever you can. Just help to support us, continue to grow, all of those things. Omari, it made me think. So I don't think we talked about it on this podcast. I had somebody tweet at me. They had only listened to the podcast. It was either this or Game Theory. I think it was Game Theory. But then they saw a picture of me and they left a comment on my Twitter that, Bryce, this may be a little bit weird, but I always pictured you with hair whenever I listened to you on the pod.
What kind of hair?
I don't know, but they was surprised that I was bald. And so it was just funny to me that you think about what we do, Omari. We're 122 episodes in with this one. And there are truly people who only know our voices. They have no idea what we look like. A ton of our listeners aren't on Twitter. And if they're not going on YouTube and watching these, all they know is our voices. And that just kind of reminded me, kind of the unique relationship of all of this is that we have so many people that listen to us. And this is why it's so much fun to do. But they have really no idea, maybe even what we look like, let alone really know us. So I don't know. It's just always really fun whenever you get that perspective again.
Yeah, well, it must be nice to know that you sound like you have hair. Like, I don't know what, like if it's the intonation of your voice or what, but you sound like somebody that would have hair. Like, I don't know if that means you sound young or what that means. I mean, you are young. You're what, 36? Like, that's young.
37. So that was the other. Someone came in and said, like, hey, the way you speak, it sounds like you're younger than what you are. And it's like, well, is that a good or bad thing? Is it good to sound young? Or is it like, oh, we see him, it's like, man, he looks old. I'm like, guys, I'm a teacher and I have 3 kids. Like, that stuff wears on you, man. Like, stress. My students always ask me, Omari, Mr. Simon, why are you bald? And I just point at them. I'm like, if you had to teach you every single day except for the summer, you would be bald as well. So
you're like the only bald representative in their life. Like you're just on an island with your baldness. Like they don't have any bald dads, no uncles.
That's what I'm saying. Like it's a shock to them. My daughter is the worst. Like she thinks it's the funniest thing ever, and I don't know. So all right, let's get some things here that we put out recently. So if you guys are looking for mock drafts, we've talked a lot of draft. We had Sam Bassini on last week. Go listen to that. Tomorrow on the Basketball Bulletin, a project I do with Keith Smith and Trevor Lane. Wes was a part of this one. Sorry, Omari, love you. We did another mock, like a community mock, consensus mock. We're putting that out on Tuesday over there for free. And then me and Sam just recently did a new mock as well, where he took Matas Buzelis at number 3. And then Omari, you put out tons of content recently talking about the head of basketball operations, president of basketball operations, whatever we're calling it. So make sure you go read that stuff. What's the most recent stuff, Omari? And I guess if there's any intel or insight into the search.
Yeah, most recent, I mean, we're recording Monday, was yesterday, and it was just a slight update. I mean, there's really nothing groundbreaking at this point. I just gave people a little bit of insight on who the search firm is and sort of the timeline they're operating on. And then also a couple candidates I heard are likely to be part of the process who have been rumored. So if you haven't checked that out, check that out. And yeah, I feel like within the next few episodes, and I know we're going to have a lot of draft stuff too, but there should be more updates as we get through the rest of May.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting too, because it's kind of like with coaches. I think who you give the credit to for some draft picks and trades and stuff like that, like you want to give it to the GM, but we all know that, everything doesn't go through them. Like every draft pick wasn't them doing the scouting and picking out the player, So it's even whenever they sign whoever it is, and we all go and look at their history of the trades they've made and the players they've drafted, we still don't know how much of the credit goes to them, how much goes to somebody else, circumstance. And at the end of the day, Omari, like sometimes there's just luck involved in some of these things, right? Like you happen to pick the guy that ends up being the best in that spot. So I think we can go and do some of our research and figure out what we're getting. But I know I'm excited just to get somebody in. Hopefully they, make them accessible to you guys. You're able to ask them and we get some sort of vision from them moving forward on those things. Last thing before we get into these trades, because we have a lot of them. What have you thought about the playoffs? I mean, we got a big game right after we record this. Well, not right after, but tonight, the Nuggets Wolves game 2. The other game 1s are starting. Cavs finished off the Magic yesterday on Sunday. Where are you at with the playoffs? We'll get the Thunder and the Mavs. We get the Celtics and the Cavs that I just talked about. That Knicks and Pacers series will be interesting. I've kind of fallen in love with this Knicks team. Where are you at?
Yeah, I mean, obviously round 1 was pretty exciting, I thought, across the board. But really, I think the best game probably of the last couple of days was just game 1 between Denver and Minnesota, where it seemed like Minnesota just swarmed everywhere on defense and it just completely knocked Denver out of a rhythm, which you really don't see too often. You combine that with just the altitude difference, which is always tough for teams on the road in Denver, which seem to be killing some of the players late, and to still pull out that win. I think I've always seen Minnesota, pretty much since midway through the season as like a legit contender, just because of, just the synergy they found compared to, this point last year and Rudy Gobert's performance. They seem legit, but to steal game 1, it's like, okay, this team might actually be legit, right? So that's super excited for game 2 of that tonight. And then obviously, game 1 starting on the east side will be fun as well. But I feel like I'm more so invested in the West Coast series at this point.
I mean, I'll say this. If Minnesota gets this one tonight, winning 2 on the road, this thing gets real interesting. I expect the Nuggets to come out and play really well and win this one handedly. I mean, I'm not saying blow them out, but if this is if Minnesota keeps this one close whenever Denver really has to respond, I think we're really in for our series here. This Minnesota defense has been crazy. Okay, I wasn't going to bring up this part, but since we have the comments. So Pound the Pavement says, what does Bryce think about the beef? And then YouTube user says, Bryce following a rap beef would be amazing. Bryce,
that's a good question.
Bryce does not follow the rap beef. I couldn't even tell you the people involved. Drake is one of them. Is that correct?
Yes, Drake is one of them.
I don't know any other names. I couldn't give you another name. So update me real quick, Omari, on this rap, because somebody finally came back after you guys had been begging for them to come back at him or something.
Yeah, just the extremely brief version is that K-Dot's been trying to beef with Drake for the last 10 years. Why, I don't know. They toured together. They've done songs together. And, it's just been a rivalry since. And they've just had some warning shots at each other in, the past however years. And then, Kendrick just started going after Drake entirely, a month and a half ago. And then they've been exchanging diss tracks. And Kendrick has done everything in his power to just completely eviscerate Drake in this battle. And it's captured the attention of everybody in my age bracket, at least. I had 3 or 4 group chats going Saturday night talking about it. So you haven't missed a whole lot. If you're not into rap, then I would not even say go look it up. It's in the grand scheme, it probably went on longer than it needed to for being real, but you're not missing anything, Bryce. So yeah.
Wes says K-Dot is Kendrick Lamar, right? Thank you, Wes, because when he said K-Dot, I didn't know who he was talking about either. YouTube user says, when you say beef, Bryce wants to know what cut and quality.
That's true.
That's exactly right. Whenever he said, what does Bryce think about the beef, it definitely did not go to this rap situation. For the record, I listened to rap growing up, Omari, but I listened to
you listened to Nelly. Well, I was going to say
Nelly and 50 and Eminem and Tupac and that stage of things. I've been out of the rap game for quite a while now. And
Pac beefed with Biggie, so you're familiar with that, right?
Yeah, I know that one.
He's had a lot of beefs.
Yeah, I guess I just didn't follow that stuff.
Okay.
Like we didn't have Twitter back then, so I don't know. Like I just it was different. Like I just liked the beats. It was something to work out to. I barely listen to music anymore. Okay, we have like 30 of these off-season plans to get to. So of all the episodes for us to go off the rails for 10 minutes, this may not have been the best one, but you said like let's
just rapid fire.
We're gonna rapid fire a little bit. Oh, Lori said, Omari's dad gets in. Don't get me started on these rap beefs.
Don't need to rap beefs.
I love it, Mr. O. We will go a little bit rapid fire. We're not going to get like super detailed, crazy analysis. Omari, if we get one that you're interested in, we'll stop. We'll talk about it. Guys, I want to be real with you. I got overwhelmed. Usually we ask for stuff like this, like a mailbag, and we have to come back the next day and be like, hey, we've got a few more questions we could get to. When Omari quote tweeted it and says we are still taking submissions, I immediately texted him and said, no, we are not, Omari. Go delete that text.
We already had like 35, and I was just like, let's get some more. Like,
no,
let's get
so
50.
I stopped copying and pasting, to be quite honest with people. So we appreciate you guys so much. But without further ado, this is from Jesse. So we asked for 1 trade and 2 signings. That was the parameters around that for anybody who's not on Twitter. So if you're like, why is everybody just doing it this way? We said, don't worry about the draft pick right now. We don't know where it's at. Give us 1 trade and then the 2 signings to go with it. So Omari, this first one is trade Duren and Sasser for a defensive-minded non-all-star wing, i.e. Herb Jones, Jonathan Isaac, and then sign Isaiah Hartenstein and Malik Monk. We may want to just talk about those 2 because that was a lot of the combinations. Yeah. What are your thoughts with that? That gives you a Cade, Ivy, Grimes, Monk, Fontecchio, Asar, Jones / Isaac, Hartenstein, Stu rotation there. What are your thoughts on trading Duren and Sasser for one of those wings and then Hartenstein and Monk? Let's start with the trade first.
So I always struggle with those types of deals because, I guess one, if you look at like a defense-minded non-all-star wing like an Herb Jones or Jonathan Isaac or Trey Murphy or any of those guys, I always look at the other team and I say, what's the incentive for the other side, to trade a young wing who can defend, for, 2 young players so far in their careers who have not, so you always throw out sort of like the hypothetical names who would fit that class of player, but I always look at the other team and it's like, well, I don't know if Orlando's looking at Jalen Duren, like we have to have him when they already have so many bigs. I don't know if New Orleans is looking at Marcus Sasser when they already have CJ but McCollum, right? Like you really can only have so many bigs.
Alvarado and
Alvarado, like you really don't need, 3 6'0" guards or 6'1" guards on the roster. Like it's already tough to just do 2 and that only works because Jose Alvarado is such a pest defensively. So I always struggle with those types of deals because I just think in a lot of ways it's like whatever you're trading is probably not something the other team is going to be interested in, and you're probably going to have to give up a lot more than Duren and Sasser, or just trade different players altogether if you are the Pistons. But I think beyond that, like in general, if you're in on Sarr, like I would just say that, like either if you're in on Sarr or you plan on going after a Claxton or Hartenstein type in free agency, then that type of deal does make sense if you're trading Duren, and that's probably one of the big things that the next president will have to figure out. But there are some bigs in the draft that make sense, whether it's Sarr or Klingon. Like, I think both of those guys are starting bigs, like Claxton, Hartenstein, obviously already really productive young bigs. So if that's the route you want to go, then yeah, trading Duren and or Sasser makes a lot of sense. But it's probably going to take more than that to get one of those defense-minded wings.
Yeah, I don't think Herb is going anywhere. Somebody said it. Yeah, like he's on such a good contract. The other thing is, the big conversation right now is that Brandon Ingram, and we'll talk about him a little bit later, but Brandon Ingram's going to be the guy that the Pelicans trade. Well, if they trade BI, I would assume they want to keep any of these other wings they have on the roster. I do think Duren makes a little bit of sense for the Pelicans. Like you said, Valanciunas is a free agent. He's not like the defensive anchor that maybe you would want there, but it could be a guy that goes in and, he would start for that team. I think they should be looking for a different type of big to play off of Zion. But again, like it could make sense there a little bit. I just don't think you're getting Herb Jones from there. Jonathan Isaac's a little different. Like I feel like Orlando played him as like the 5, right? Like at the end of the year and the first 2 playoff games, they were starting him at the 5 and had moved Wendell Carter Jr. to the bench. And again, I don't see why they would trade for Duren. You said this, they have Wendell Carter Jr., they have Mo Wagner, who I think is not only Franz's brother, so the relationship there, I think Mo's pretty good as a backup 5-man in the NBA. And they didn't even play Goga Batadze like the second half of the season, who is a pretty good player. So I don't think, I like the ideas of these. I never want to be overly critical. I just don't think either of those trades end up happening. Let's talk about the free agent signings. before we move on to the next one. Let's just start with Isaiah Hartenstein. What are your thoughts on him? And like, I don't even want to do the money thing because I don't even know if we all understand the market for these guys. It depends on who actually has cap space. The salary cap's going up, all of that. You have to outbid the Knicks, obviously. What would you think about adding Isaiah Hartenstein to this roster?
So, I mean, I think he's one of the guys who checks just so many different boxes for the Pistons and what they need at that position. Obviously, being somebody who's a pretty strong defender. I thought he had a really solid series against Philly. Young, he's 25 years old. I'll be curious to see, again, like it's kind of tough to peg the numbers for some of these teams just because, like, you have teams, it's like you have two extremes. Like, you have teams with cap space and then teams that just absolutely have to shed salary.
Yeah.
And it's just tough to see how those, like, puzzle pieces are going to fit together and how much the extra assets like OKC or whatnot kind of dictates some of these deals and signings. But to me, Hartenstein just makes a lot of sense. Like, if you are looking at just getting a starting center or a defense-minded center at all costs this offseason, then he's like the short list of guys that you are probably looking at throwing $20-ish million to, if not more.
Yeah, I think that's a
good
season,
number. By the way, not overall.
Yeah, I think that's probably where the number is going to start with him this summer. And I agree. I think he's really good. I've been a fan of him for a while. The one caveat I will throw is, he doesn't stretch the floor, and like, that's my thing is how many resources do you want to throw into the center position with guys who can't really stretch the floor? So if he could do that, obviously he'd be more coveted even, but I would be a little bit more intrigued. What I find interesting is you bring in Hartenstein. Okay, maybe that moves Duren to the bench or whatever, right? Like, they have to split minutes. Well, now you have to play Stu almost exclusively at the 4. And then I'm like, we're back in that same scenario that I don't love. So that's one thing I always find whenever we go through some of these ideas. Let's talk Malik Monk. And I know we're settling in on this one for a while, guys, but this will also help us navigate some of the ones later. What are your thoughts on bringing Malik Monk to this team? Because I know he's going to be a big name. Another guy, Omari, you're probably going to have to get over $20 million a year to get him out of Sacramento, but you can outbid Sacramento because of the situation they're in.
No doubt. Like, I've always liked Malik Monk, like dating back to the draft. And it took a few years to really kind of find his niche in the league. But, I mean, of course, he's been really solid, really since he got to the Lakers a couple of years ago. And then, of course, in Sacramento. Like, I have mixed feelings, I think. I think on the one hand, just to bring in a guy who's a great athlete, obviously, like a flamethrower of a shooter who could really heat up, like get his own shot. It makes sense from that standpoint. It's just you're adding a guard who pretty much just occupies that role, right? Like, he's not going to be a primary binder type guy. He's also not that great of a defender, just because of his size. And do the Pistons have the type of roster that could make up for those weaknesses? And I'm just not sure if they do. Like, I like the idea of Malik Monk, but I just look at it from a roster standpoint, and that's probably a luxury that they don't need to invest in. You could probably get shooting for a little bit less, and you probably need to invest more of that money onto the defensive end to justify that.
Yeah, that's where it gets really interesting. I think where I'm at with Monk, as much as I love him, I think it would have to be a coinciding move where, like, do you keep Jaden Ivey on the roster if you bring in Malik Monk? As Red Baron Arcade says, for a team to start, not come off the bench. So that's my thing is, like, are you going to sign him to 20 plus million to come off the bench? Is he going to be happy? Like, will he sign with you if the role is going to be off the bench? Is this a case where he comes in and now he's the starter and Ivy comes off the bench, right? Like, we're not asking J.I. to come off the bench for Killian Hayes. You're asking him to come off the bench for someone like Malik Monk. The defense is the really interesting aspect because I think he does some good things, but he's not that guy. And we've talked about putting good defenders around Kane Cunningham. So you're still going to have two not great defenders in the backcourt. I don't think you can play Cade, Ivy, and Monk all together because now you have three not good defenders. In general, I like the idea of Monk. I think what a lot of these for me, Omari, is what are the coinciding moves, right? A lot of these are going to have to happen together. They don't make as much sense just in a vacuum, right? We talked about on Locked On Pistons who threw out names at us, and Julius Randle was one of them. And I said I would consider Julius Randle if it coincided with other moves. I wouldn't make a trade for Julius Randle and just be like, hey, we're going to do that. I would want to know what else we're going to do because you want to start building things out around that. So we'll start off with that. Again, we'll talk about a lot of these guys moving forward. Let's go to a break real quick here, Omari, and then we'll get right into the next one from Planeta Pistons, which is a completely different idea for the summer than what we just talked about.
All right, we're back with segment 2. And as Bryce mentioned, we're going to lead off with this trade idea from Planeta Pistons. So the trade is trading Fournier and Troy Brown Jr., which, of course, will require the Pistons to pick up their options. And then their 2026 first-round pick. And I'll say now they can't, I don't think they could trade that pick. I think the first one they could trade is either 28.
That was my first thought as well.
So we could just push that back a few years for Duncan Robinson and Nikola Jovic. So it's essentially a salary matching deal and a future first for Duncan Robinson and Nikola Jovic. I'll let you grab this one first, Bryce.
Yeah, I just want to shout out real quick here from Taya645. Hi, Bryce and Omari. I'm not going to try your name here. I'm sorry, my guy. I'm really sorry. But Italian Pistons fan from Italy. So appreciate that. Get listeners from all over the country, all over the world.
Thanks for hopping in, man.
Yeah,
Happy
absolutely. So, yeah, I think Duncan Robinson could make sense on this team. Nikola Jovic is a guy I wasn't super intrigued by. He did some good things for this team, right? He was starting for this team at the end of the year, so that makes a little more sense. Giving up a first round for those guys in the future when you're already going to be out one, I don't think those guys move the needle enough for me, Omari. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think both teams probably say no to this one. For the Pistons, then you're already down the first round pick, and then you're tying up the rest of your first round picks through the next 7 years by trading the other future one you have, which just really hog ties you, like asset wise, for Duncan Robinson and Nikola Jovic. I mean, yeah, both of those guys are players you're looking for, like Robinson being a really great shooter. Jovic, I think he's only a year 2, and he's just, or year 1. Is he a rookie or something? Either way, like
this is his second year.
Yeah, it's his second year, but he just has a really good all-around game. Like, those guys make sense. I just think what the Pistons have to sacrifice just from a flexibility standpoint probably isn't worth it. And I also don't know if Miami's looking at 48 Troy Brown, like in that first round pick that's going to be a few years down the road, when they could just keep Duncan Robinson and Nikola Jovic, who obviously are 2 homegrown guys and have been pretty good for him. So in this instance, I think both teams probably pass on it.
And just to be clear for everybody, Troy Brown Jr. has a non-guaranteed contract. So I know a lot of times I don't talk about Troy Brown Jr. coming back, but he could if the Pistons see a reason to need that salary for a move or whatever. So the 2 signings in this deal, Omari, were Kyle Anderson and Nick Claxton. I don't have a lot of thoughts on Kyle Anderson. I will say this about this offseason plan, Omari. This would give you a wing forward room, however people want to slice it, of Fontecchio, Asar, Duncan Robinson, Jovic, and Kyle Anderson. I like the idea of that. I think some of the offseason plans we're going to talk about end up with you being very guard heavy or very center heavy and a little light at the wing positions, which I don't want going into the offseason. I don't necessarily love all of those names, but I like the idea behind it. I want to focus more and ask you about Nick Claxton, which would give you a big man room of Duren, Claxton, and Stu, which again, I'm not saying you don't make moves because of Isaiah Stewart. I just think he's the odd man out that people didn't realize in a lot of these moves. Your thought on adding Nick Claxton into this front court?
Yeah, I mean, I really like Nick Claxton. He averaged a double-double this past season. Obviously, really has had a breakout 2 years where he's been just a really solid all-around defender for a big man. I mean, he's young, he's athletic. I think he's probably the exact archetype of player like you would want to pursue in free agency just, because of his age and just how many holes he fills. Like I actually covered Kyle Anderson when I was in like Memphis. Like I will say, like he does everything you want from a modern four except shoot the ball. So, the Pistons probably just can't afford to go after a player like that who doesn't shoot at all. But I love like everything else he does. But yeah, like I think Nick Claxton makes a lot of sense at the 5.
Okay, this is from Brandon Crew. He says, trade this year's first-round pick for number 14. The Blazers have 2 first-round picks and Jeremy Grant. Thoughts on that? So essentially, you could be moving from wherever, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, back to 14. So you still get a lottery pick. I don't hate that idea in general. And then you're also bringing in Jeremy Grant, that contract at his age.
Yeah, I mean, I actually like that. Like, I don't know how eager Portland is to get off of Jeremy Grant's deal, but if they do have a player they really like, that high in the draft, like they could use a big man. So, maybe they're looking at Alex Sarr, like we could have a chance to go after him, that we could do that. Like, obviously they have, well, I guess like we have to see how the lottery kind of shakes out too. So that's a hypothetical, but I like that in a nutshell. Like, I think Jeremy Grant like makes sense as a 4 for this team. And we've talked about that on the pod before. If you move back from 1st to 14, like that's probably a lot more dramatic than like 5 to 14. But depending on who's at 14, like that could be worthwhile. Like maybe you want to get a big that can stretch the floor and you just take Kyle Filipowski there.
Sure.
So yeah, I like that. Like I could get behind that.
Okay, so he also had signing Shetty Osman and Jalen Smith, which would be interesting. Again, I will say with Brendan here, you end up with Cade, Ivy, Grimes, and Sasser kind of in the backcourt. I know Grimes can kind of be like a guard wing or whatever. Fontecchio, Asar, Jeremy Grant, and Osman at the wing forwards. Duran, Stu, and Jalen Smith at the bigs. I think just in terms of kind of a well-rounded roster, I think this one is pretty decent. And of course, this doesn't include, I would assume you would still have money left over from this stuff, but you have some bigs that can stretch the floor just a little bit at least. You have, some depth at the wing spot. You still have the backcourt. I think Brendan did a good job there. Even if I don't necessarily love all the players, I do think he did a good job there, just kind of balancing things out with the roster. So PJ Heinz is the next one. He says trade Grimes for Bogdan Bogdanovic. And his rationale there is the Hawks need cap relief. And for him, I would assume, and I don't think we would disagree, at least offensively, that this would be an upgrade for the Pistons in terms of the scoring punch you would get there.
Yeah, I mean, I could get behind that one as well. Like, I've sort of looked at Atlanta as what it little seems that's probably going to have to come off of one of their wings this offseason just because it makes sense for them to shed some salary. Like, obviously, they're kind of caught in the middle, so you've got to pick some direction. Like, if you get Bogdanovic, I mean, a guy that can really shoot the ball, like, I think that makes sense, especially if, like, for whatever reason, the incoming, president of basketball operations or head of basketball operations or whatever you want to say, decides that, Grimes is somebody they want to invest in going forward. Like DeAndre Hunter is also a guy who will kind of fill a similar role for Detroit and for Atlanta as far as just shedding salary since they have Jalen Johnson. So, it makes sense for them to maybe make a commitment there down the road. So that makes sense to me. I can get behind it.
Yeah, my one quibble there would be is where's the defense going to come from, right? And it depends. He does say sign Isaiah Hartenstein, so there's some defense on the back line. And then he says Tyus Jones. So I want to settle on Tyus Jones just a little bit, Omari, because do you think this team needs that veteran backup point guard? You would still have, obviously, I was shocked how many non-Jaden Ivey trades there were in this. Insane that there weren't more. The next one actually is, but you would still have Cade, Ivey, Sasser, and then do you think adding Tyus Jones so that makes sense? We talked about this with Monte Morris, and at the end of the day, listen, Monte Morris isn't going to be huge for the Timberwolves in the playoffs. I don't think. It just is what it is. But if you go look at his regular season stats with the Timberwolves, and I think we've talked about him, he was exactly what this Pistons team needed in terms of he made threes and he didn't turn the ball over. So someone like Tyus Jones that could fill that role, do you think that still could be something important for them?
Yeah, Tyus is another guy. Actually, they were on the same Grizzlies team that had Kyle Anderson, and they ended up committing to him over the offseason. But I might be confusing those years together. Anyway, Tyus Jones was a really good backup for John Morant. Obviously had a much different style, but just he took care of the ball and he could really hit threes. So I think in a lot of ways he is similar to Monte Morris. And I do think he makes sense for the Pistons simply because, one, this team was just so turnover prone. And I don't know what extent you could fix that as this offseason. Obviously guys just have to become much better decision makers than they were. But Tyus helps you with that pretty directly. He could play next to Cade, of course, with Cade being 6'6". This team probably does need more of a table-setting point guard somewhere in the hierarchy, whether it's your second or third guard off the bench or whoever it is. That's probably something you can afford to spend some of your money on this offseason. And I think Tyus actually fits that to a T. So I would definitely endorse that type of signing.
Okay, I want to address him real quick. And listen, we love all of you guys in the chat. Cartier says, fire Monty. We really got no future with him. Listen, I get it. We've critiqued Monty. Sam came on and critiqued Monty. Here's what I want to say. Let's not lose sight of how bad this roster was, regardless of who the coach was. I don't think any of us sit here and think this team should have won 30, 35 games with a different coach. Unless you're just talking about the elite of the elite. You bring in Spo, maybe Spo gets that out. I think we're giving the roster and the front office a pass whenever we just say none of this is fixable or all of this is on Monty. So I just want to say that we can't just say, oh, new coach, everything's going to be better. We can talk about Monty if you guys want to and all of that stuff. I'm just saying, we have to talk about this roster getting better and more talented if they want to win more games. So that's that. I will also say, Omari, so PJ's here. This is what I was talking about with the wing forward room with this offseason. And again, we had parameters here. He couldn't add as many as he wanted. He would say, hey, maybe we draft one. all you would have is Fontecchio, Asar, and Bogdanovic. In that, I would want more options with that. So next one is from Coney Snell. I know.
I love that name, by the way, Coney Snell.
So Wes, I always think like Coney Dog, whatever. Like, yeah, it's an awesome name. I know, Wes, you flagged one as well because it's your guy. Did that one also have Ivy for Denny Avdia? Yeah. So this is from Mike L as well. So I'll put that one up there. What about a trade structured around Jaden Ivey and Denny Avdia? Just thinking about Washington's crowded wing room, but no real dynamic playmaker like Ivy to make things happen. Coney Snell as well had Jaden Ivey for Denny Avdia.
Like, I think that makes sense on some level. You have Washington, like you mentioned, to have a dynamic playmaker in the backcourt like that. I think makes sense. Like, I don't know if Washington would see him as a point guard or a shooting guard or just a general guard in that scenario. And that's one thing I'm curious about from team to team is just how they evaluate Ivy from that standpoint. Like, you see a guy that we trust with the ball, or do you need to pair him with somebody to sort of take that playmaking pressure off? But like, just as a straight swap, like, I think it's probably a trade that addresses needs for both teams. Probably the argument against that is that I think who Avia is at this point, and he's a good player. Long term, is Ivy still like that higher upside guy? Like, I don't know if I make that trade this offseason, but I understand it just from the standpoint of you could see how on both sides just sort of making like that roster balancing trade makes sense.
Yeah, I think my worry with trading Jaden is like, I still think he's a really good player.
Yeah.
Again, from a roster balancing standpoint, there's a lot of sense to this in terms of Denny is a really good player on a really good contract, and it balances out what this roster needs. He's really good defensively. I know West has always been high on like his secondary playmaking, so you even get some ball handling. It's not going to be primary guy, but you get a little bit of that. Let me look at how he rounded out the roster. So here's the interesting thing with Malik Monk now, Omari. Then you sign Malik Monk to come in and, again, maybe not very good defensively in the same way Jaden Ivey isn't, but he's already the scorer. I think Malik Monk actually handles the ball pretty well, can operate a ball screen, pass, like all of those things. And then Jalen Smith. So you end up with a backcourt of Caden Monk, probably Sasser and Grimes off the bench, Fontecchio, Asar, and Denny at the wings, and then Duran, Stu, and Jalen Smith at the bigs. I think you're a little weak on the wings still. But again, you draft one, that's a roster that just seems like it makes a little more sense.
I mean, if you think you can play Denny as a big point guard, then that probably works. I think with that rotation, you still probably need somebody who can handle the ball, just given that your backcourt consists of like Cade, Malik Monk, Sasser, Grimes. Like, I don't know if I saw enough this past season to make me think that Sasser is a point guard type of player. Like, he's really good at getting his own shot. I thought he could just misread sometimes. I would say, if you really believe in his playmaking, then maybe there's something there. But you just have to really trust that you could put the ball in obvious hands and he could be a very capable primary guy. McCade is on the bench.
Yeah, I just think between Monk and Avia, you might be able to have enough. You know what I mean? Like, I just think that there's... Okay, so here's a really interesting... Team Savant says we already have a better Denny Avia and Fontecchio. Listen, I think we could debate that. But why can we only have one of those type of players? Why is it wrong to have somebody that can stretch the floor, play defense, handle the ball a little bit, especially on the wing? Like, I don't think that that's a position where duplication is a bad thing, especially if they are both ends of the floor players. Now, if it was only floor spacers, right, you could only have so many Duncan Robinsons. You know what I mean, Omari? Like, guys who can't really defend. But I don't know that I agree with that you can have too many 3-and-D wing forward Avdia, Fontecchio type of players. Like, maybe that's just me, but that's kind of where I'm at. I'm also kind of subscribing to I saw someone refer to it as the 1-3-1 roster construction. Like, you have the one primary guy, 3 wing forwards, and then the big man. And I kind of like that. I kind of like how that goes. So, and we will get to BI Team Savant. We will get to him as we work through this. So that was Snell. Matt Hegarty.
1 second. Shout out to Cody Snell. He's in the chat. DD.
Oh, shoot.
There you go.
Where was he at?
No, he's up now.
Oh, he has a different name for his YouTube. Yeah. Shout out. Hey.
Shout out to Cody Snell.
Appreciate you, man. Thank you for being in there. All right. Matt Hegarty says, send contract from high cost team. No Brandon Ingram or Che Young. So the send contract would be, I think the biggest one that people would point to directly is Andrew Wiggins. So I want to be very clear. Like the Joe Harrison contract is not something I'm interested in. We saw how it worked. It did but there are contracts out there of guys who, like, some people would say, Omari, quite frankly, that Jeremy Grant is the same contract. You know what I mean?
Say Ben Simmons.
Yeah, but I want to go with guys who may actually still be able to play. Maybe like someone like Andrew Wiggins who could resurrect his career a little bit. Would you be okay looking into that? Wes, if you have any other names, you brought up Ben Simmons. If there's any of the, like Bradley Beal is another one that's going to get brought up because of the situation the Suns are in. I wouldn't take Bradley Beal. I'm a little bit intrigued by Andrew Wiggins, I have to admit.
Yeah, again, like it's just I struggle with the hypotheticals sometimes. I think it depends on the Sin contract and sort of what you're getting with it. Like, it's Ben Simmons, a guy you want to take a spin on if Brooklyn's like, hey, we'll give you an asset just to get off of this deal. Like, I would, consider doing that for Ben Simmons. Like, I know the rap against him and everything, but the reality is that the Pistons are the absolute perfect team to sort of take a swing on something like that, especially if you're getting an asset in return too. Like Wiggins, and we talked about this with Sam last week, but again, it's just knowing exactly what his personal situation is, right? Like if he couldn't play, for Golden State last season and has that situation resolved, and again, what asset are you getting if you're taking a guy like that in? So it just comes down to the asset for me. Like it's really tough for me to answer that in a vacuum, but these are all guys who have shown that they can play to some extent. So I'm not inherently against the idea of doing that. You just need something good back as an insurance policy.
YouTube user who's always here with us and we appreciate very much. He said, I don't want Wiggins because I don't like the attitude towards basketball. Fair take. All I want to say is, I don't know that we always know the story. I don't know that I know the story. I probably don't. I know part of the story I've heard would have messed me up as well. Like if it's personal life stuff that carries over, I think we all would admit, no matter who we are, what we do, that can mess with you. And so I think there's things the Pistons would have to do due diligence on to find out, why has this lingered? What is still going on? Why was it not working in Golden State at all? Those type of things. YouTube user may be right. Like maybe he just doesn't like basketball. Maybe he never liked basketball. Maybe anything I've heard about why kind of he's in the place he's in is all just a ruse and not true. I would want to at least find out. So that's the thing with Wiggins. He said sign Hartenstein. And then this is the first stretch of these guys. So he said restricted free agents like Isaac Okoro, Obi Toppin. I don't think Emmanuel Quickley is going to be on the board. I mean, you could give him a contract. Toronto's just going to match. Max Christie, Patrick Williams is a name that I added. Matt didn't throw him in there. Any of those guys that interest you a little bit? Okoro, Toppin, Christie, Patrick Williams.
Yeah, I think all those guys to different extents. Like Isaac Okoro, obviously is a guy who can really defend. I think he's shown some growth as a shooter, which makes them intriguing. Like 6'6", slots right in on the wing. Like he checks a lot of boxes on the wing. Like Obi Toppin, same thing. I don't know if he's the defender that Isaac Okoro is, but just athletically, the way he's improved as a shooter, I love those aspects about his game. So I would do that. Max Christie, Cormac Carl Christie is a Michigan State Spartan. So I followed him for a while. Cormac Carl, he goes by Max, but Cormac Carl is just so much of a better name than Max Christie. So I'm calling him Cormac Carl.
Is that his real name?
His real name is Cormac Carl Christie.
Why doesn't he go by that? That's amazing.
That's what I'm saying. I don't know anybody named Cormac.
Yeah, I like that. Okay.
Or even just Cormac Christie. That has a ring to it.
Yeah. Max, man, what are we doing? All right.
Cormac Carl Christie. But again, 3-and-D wing, all those guys, it makes sense. I think the Pistons need to be looking at all those types of deals. Pat Williams, again, I know he's had some injury issues, so maybe you have to look at that. But I like all those guys.
Okay, let's go to a short break, and then we'll go through some of these. Well, I know somebody asked about Julius Randle earlier. I think we have that trade in here, and we'll try to touch on some other guys. There's a Denny trade, so we'll skip over Mikal Bridges. We'll talk about all those when we get back from this.
All right, we are back with segment 3, and we're trying to rapid fire through these. We're only going to be able to get to a fraction of.
Go to the pumped about Pistons, or I'll read the pumped about Pistons. So
we're starting pumped about Pistons.
Yeah, trade Fournier, because again, that's an option, so they could pick that up as salary match. Duren, Ivy, plus convey the pick for Julius Randle. I will say this. When Koo asked us about Julius Randle, it was trading one of the young assets, not Cade. So it'd be Asar or Ivy or Duren or the first round pick this year. And that's what I considered, again, depending on how else, because if you're going to trade for Julius Randle, then you need to sign free agents and go do some other things to keep things moving forward. I don't think I would add this much into it.
Yeah, I don't think I would add that much into it. Like, so Julius Randle is a good player. Like, I know when I was posed to us last week, when we were on Locked On with Koo, I was like, no at first. I thought about it, and I was like, well, for that price, yeah, because he immediately upgrades your talent floor. He's an all-star, player who flirted with the MVP conversation not too long ago. And this season, I thought was, well, he didn't shoot the ball well at all, but like beyond that, he absolutely is somebody who gives you a bona fide bucket getter next to Cade, which you need. Now, I would say with that, you're going to have to bid for him, right? So if OKC is like, we could just give you guys like 3 draft picks, like without blinking, right? The Pistons probably going to be able to get away with just like one asset to get a guy like Julius Randle. So that's what I encourage people to keep in mind is like, there's going to be a bidding war for a lot of these good players, as far as teams that have cap space. So I just really am curious to see how much sway the Pistons will have and what they're able to accomplish with that. But yeah, like that price for Randle is probably a little bit too rich for me.
Yeah, that's what Big Cheese says as well. That's too much for Julius Randle, and he's not without injuries. I think I agree. If you're getting him on a nice deal, again, one young player, he comes in and he gives you I think he's been an all-star back-to-back years. As part of that offseason, you also had the Pistons signing Hartenstein and Monk. So in that scenario, you just have Hartenstein and Stu as the bigs. I think you're a little weak at the wing with just Fontecchio, Asar, and Randle. Mixed Grimes in there a little bit. We talked about Denny Avdia. Okay, Buy-in says trade Duren, Ivy, first-round pick for Mikal Bridges. Credit to James Edward III. I think this was the exact trade he had in his article. I think that's what it would take to get Mikal Bridges, Omari. That's where I'll start.
Yeah, I think it's at least that, just because the Pistons can only, they can't really offer picks, right? So you have to offer actual players. So if you're Brooklyn, you expect to lose Nick Claxton, and you're looking at the situation like maybe it's time to trade Mikal Bridges now. Like if you really like Duren and Ivy as prospects and you get a top 5 pick with that, then sure, maybe there's some interest there. I also think just because of how high they've set the price for Mikal Bridges in the past, and also just the fact that Mikal's the type of player that, I don't know if you could build around Mikal Bridges, but whatever the next iteration of your team is going to look like, he could fit that. There's probably never a point in any sort of rebuild situation where you're like, I don't know if Mikal is going to fit next to player X. He will. So, I don't know if the pressure is there for them to take that type of deal, especially for 2 guys with Ivy and Duren, where you basically only get a 1-year evaluation period before you have to really start talking, how much money do we invest in this type of guy? So I think that trade, if you're the Pistons and you just really, really want to upgrade your wing, that's still a pretty high price, I think, for a guy like Mikal, but you could see the logic there depending on how you feel about Cade and fit issues and upside and all that. But I would say with that, I feel like they would, if they're trading Mikal Bridges, they're probably going to want more than what the Pistons could offer just from a draft standpoint.
I mean, that's the thing. At the end of the day, you're probably not getting him because somebody else is going to outbid you. I will say, getting Mikal Bridges, of the guys we talk about, is probably the one I would be immediately the most excited about, depending on what it took. But eventually I'd get over that and just be like, this is a great fit next to Cade Cunningham. It's the 3-and-D wing. I think he's an incredible third option on a really good team. He's probably a good enough player until this team really is ready to make steps to be the second best player. I mean, he's obviously good enough to be the second best player on this team off of Cade Cunningham. They rounded out the offseason with signing Miles Bridges and then either Hartenstein or Claxton. So in the backcourt, you would have Cade, Grimes, and Sasser. This, again, is a balanced situation for me where you have Fontecchio, Asar, Bridges, and Bridges as wing forwards, and then Claxton and Stu in the front court. So again, we talked about the Bridges stuff, some of that, but I think overall, that's a well-rounded roster, and, can you make it happen or not? Scott asked, trade Duren, Ivy, first-round pick for Trae Young. Thoughts on trading for Trae Young?
No. And the thing is, I actually like Trae as a player probably more than the average, and I think if you just really paired him with, the right big, you would just be in perfect shape. I don't think the Pistons have that big, and I also think, but you have Cade. You just really don't need to trade for a guy like Trae, even though right now Trae probably is a better player than Cade. I'm still taking Cade, so I think defensive upside down the road and everything he's shown over making a commitment to Trae. He's just too small. It's really tough to build around guys like that. You really got to have the right roster around him, so I would be out on that.
Yeah, listen, I think Trae Young's really, really good. I am not interested in this. We just saw him play with another guy in DeJounte Murray. I'm not saying him and Cade are the same thing, but like, unless you just tell me Trae Young is willing to go run around off ball and relocate and do all of those things, it doesn't make sense to me. He had signing Tobias Harris. I know we had a comment about that. Where are you at with Tobias Harris? I know, he was awful in the play. Yeah. And that last game was brutal. Here's the thing. Tobias Harris isn't going to be playing in the playoffs with the Detroit Pistons over the next few years.
Yeah.
So is he still a valuable regular season piece? What can you sign him for? This is not a guy I'm going to get excited about. If they throw the bag at him, he wouldn't be my first, second, or third option. But are you telling me that Tobias Harris couldn't come in and be a decent addition to this roster along with other things? I wouldn't go as that far with Tobias Harris.
Yeah, I've been surprised by some of the discourse with Tobias. Well, not really. Like, he's already played in Detroit, and I think people just sort of see him as he is a known commodity. Like, he's not exciting. Like, I think just from an excitement standpoint, that's probably one of the least exciting things you can do this offseason, simply because he's played here before. And, there's really no intrigue to something like that. Like, I also look at it as Tobias Harris is not washed. He's not cooked. Like, I know people say that, but he's still was an efficient offensive player last season, still is a solid rebounder, underwhelmed in the playoffs. He's not going to make the Pistons a playoff contender. And if the price is right, he's a rotation wing. He's a rotation forward on a team that needs rotation forwards. So, again, if the price is right, I think it makes sense. He know what he gives you. He would have been Detroit's best player last season? Okay, you want to say Cade is better? But it's like a 14-win team. Fontecchio, who else? This is somebody who upgrades Detroit's solid floor, and they need that. So if the price is right, then 100%, yeah. Like
Red Baron Arcade says, he'll be cheaper than you think. And you know what? That might be right. After what we just saw in the playoffs, He may be cheaper than what people think, especially when you consider what teams are actually going to have cap space. All right, next one from V. Prasad. He says, trade a first-round pick for Naz Reid and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Listen, this is a dream scenario for me, Omari. The Wolves are going on a run now where maybe they do pay the tax. If the Wolves go, and make it to the Western Conference Finals or the NBA Finals or, win the NBA championship, I think that ownership is a little bit more willing to pay the tax. I don't think you could get both of these guys. My guess is you would only get Naz Reid. I would be really excited about Naz Reid. What do you think? Where are you at with the Timberwolves in terms of trying to duck some of that luxury tax bill and maybe you be able to get a Naz Reid or listen, I would love with Nickeil Alexander-Walker as well. I think he'd make a lot of sense. He's been awesome defensively all year. Now we're seeing it play out in the playoffs. What do you think about either one of those guys?
Yeah, I think they both make sense. They both fill needs, obviously. And then, of course, Minnesota, just looking at their history, they've never really been fond of paying the luxury tax. So that would necessitate that you trade somebody that would likely be one of Karl-Anthony Towns or not NAW, Naz Reid, just because of your roster makeup, right? You just can't commit to two guys playing power forward, with the amount of money that they're going to make. So, yeah, I think that makes sense. I'd be curious if they could get it done for less than the first round pick, to be honest. But just from a pure player standpoint, I think Naz Reid gives you a guy who can really come in and score the ball and rebound and obviously upgrades your talent floor. So, again, I'm just curious about the price, and there will probably be some sort of bidding war. But, obviously, those are two guys that Detroit should be looking at.
Pound the Pavement says, do the Pistons need a better medical staff than injuries since we lost Kander? Listen, I just don't, maybe Omari has some insight to I don't think we as fans truly have enough information to know how to judge properly a medical staff. We don't know what process they have. We don't know our players listening to what they're telling them to do. I admit, and I am aware that there could be bad medical staffs. I get it. I understand that. I played Division I basketball. I realize that you can get bad information and stuff like that. I'm just saying, I don't know that as fans, we know that just because it seems like there's injury-riddled seasons and stuff like that. So
yeah, I think, all teams deal with injuries. I don't know if the Pistons have really been excessively more than the average team. Some guys are just going to be a bit injury prone, and I think that's it. But Detroit's numbers are also skewed because they've shut guys down at the end of the year, and I think that's made it look worse than usual. But I just think that the medical team is always a scapegoat. Teams don't even really have static medical teams. People change jobs all the time. The Pistons haven't had the same medical team since Artie Kander left. So Yeah, to me, like, I just always see that as a scapegoat. Like, I think if you compare the Pistons to other teams, kind of removing, like, the last 6 weeks of the season when guys are shut down, like, I can't imagine their numbers are really that out of whack.
Wes says that he believes, and he just gave me the thumbs up, so I think it checks out, that if you remove the games where guys were intentionally set down at the end of the season, the Pistons have not had unusually unluck with injuries. So just some interesting perspective. So Greg throws out trade Ivy for Tyler Hero. This gets the Heat under the tax. I do think it's a better fit in terms of the offense, right? Like, you still have defensive limitations here, but I do think Tyler Hero, just where he's at in his career and what he can do offensively, this is a better fit. I will say with this, and I'll let you talk, he then says sign Hartenstein. Hartenstein was very popular, and Gary Trent Jr. The one thing I'll say, this is another one of those I think that ended up with the roster a little bit lopsided. You had Cade, Grimes, Sasser, Hero, Gary Trent Jr. The only true like wing forwards on the roster are Fontecchio and Asar. And then you have Hartenstein, Duran, and Stu. Maybe you think Stu can play the 4. That's not where I'm at, but I just wanted to point that out. What would you think about Tyler Hero? It doesn't have to be necessarily Jaden Ivey, but, Tyler Hero in general.
Yeah, I like Tyler Hero. Like, he's a guy that just, averaged 21 points, like, really good efficiency, like, could really, really shoot the ball on high volume, like, good secondary playmaker. Like, offensively, I think you could plug him in right next to Cade, like, with no issues. Like, those guys are going to mesh together really well. Tyler can make plays happen with and without the ball, so no issues there. He doesn't help you defensively at all. Like, maybe you could withstand that if you anticipate Cade being better on that end than he was last season, and obviously upgrading your defense elsewhere. But, like, I like Hero. Like, I don't know if he's underrated or, like, maybe he's properly rated, but I think offensively, he has the, like Riley called Hero fragile. Like, he has injury issues. Listen, he was only talking about physically and not, like, mentally or emotionally or anything, but like, if the price is right, then I say, why not?
All right, I want to talk about one more guy, and then we have some questions. If you guys have any you want to get in, we'll try to really hit those quick. I know there's a Najee Marshall question that goes way back. I definitely want to talk about that because I'm a big Najee Marshall fan. Brandon Ingram, we don't even have to do the trade. So shout out to everybody. Again, Sean Corp threw one in there. Jonathan Schwartz, Alfonso Lafort, Lasagna, Rich, Dre, Piston Slappy, like all of you, we appreciate you so much. What do you think about Brandon Ingram?
Yeah, I just, I'm not crazy about Ingram's fit. Like we talked about it with Sam last week. Like, again, he upgrades your talent floor, but, like he's more of an ISO guy. Like, he looks for his own shot. Like, he would take the ball in Cade's hands. And for the price, like, you would have to pay him to keep him. Like, I'm just not sure if he's the right fit. So it's like, I'm not inherently against it just because you do need players of his caliber. I just don't know if he's the player you need to go after.
So where I've grown a little bit on this is I think he can get a bucket. He's at a position you need, and maybe he's just the guy that gets you to the next guy. Now, what really scares me is what YouTube user just typed. I think BI probably wants a max as well. And I think my understanding from a Locked On Pelicans guy or something like that was 4 years, $200 million. So you're looking at paying BI $50 million a year. And my thing with that is, I just haven't crunched the numbers enough to know where does that send your flexibility, right? You're about to give Cade probably the rookie max extension. Then you sign BI to that. Where is your path forward in terms of building out the rest of the roster? Because those two guys aren't taking you to real contention, like real playoff bursts and stuff like that. So is there enough flexibility? Do you have the draft pick capital? All of those different things to continue to build out the roster. So that's why I always push back. I saw somebody that had brought up Karl Anthony Towns. I like the idea. I think you could buy low if the Timberwolves are trying to duck the luxury tax, but that's a huge contract for you to have to deal with moving forward. So let's get to a few here. YouTube user says, Bryce, what contract do you think it takes to get Najee Marshall? 3, maybe 4 years, 10 to 15 per, maybe front load and descend. I like that. Talking to Sam about this, I actually think you can get him for a little bit less than that. I think we talked about like the 8 to 10 to 12 range. So I think maybe the lower end of what you have here, but if you had to start a little higher and then descend it, especially with the way the cap's going to go the other way, I think Najee Marshall makes a ton of sense for Detroit. And I like the Pelicans roster. If I was Najee Marshall, I would go to the market and go find a bigger role for myself.
Yeah, no, like I agree with everything you just said. I like Najee Marshall. He's another player who fits the archetype of what the Pistons should be pursuing this offseason. And yeah, I mean, New Orleans just has so many contract situations it seems like they have to resolve this season and next that if I could pry Najee Marshall away on a good deal, then I'm absolutely looking at doing that.
Ethan Lulkins from Twitter says, how much would you be willing to pay Patrick Williams to take him away from the Bulls? Feel like he fits extremely well. Yeah, I mean, I think he fits well. I just wonder, like, there's some injury stuff there. What does it take to lure him away? Like, I don't know that I want to give him some crazy contract in that situation. I guess here's what I'd say, Omari, is I don't know that I'd be comfortable going high enough that it would keep the Bulls from matching, would be my guess.
Yeah, I'm the same way. Like, whatever it would take to, there's just probably safer routes you can go, like with your cap space this offseason. Like, you should look at taking some swings, but this doesn't necessarily need to be a swing offseason. This needs to be let's raise our floor as high as we reasonably can offseason.
So YouTube user says 20 million, probably what it takes to get Patrick Williams, maybe 25. I would not be willing to go there. No. I would not give that. So I'm not saying you would, they're just saying if that's the number it is. Richard Brooks says, any of these unrestricted free agents of interest, Kelly Oubre Jr., I thought he looked pretty good in that series against the Knicks. I thought he did an admirable job at times. Obviously, Brunson still went crazy because Brunson is just crazy right now. But Oubre, not necessarily known for his defense anyway, but at least took the matchup, frustrated Brunson at times, especially early in that series. Najee Marshall, we talked about. I think Derrick Jones Jr. has been good for the Mavs. Taurean Prince probably would be a little bit lower. I will say this, YouTube user, I thought he played his role well in Philadelphia. I wonder if he does come to a team like Detroit, if Oubre does go back into that kind of inefficient chucker. But you don't need to rank him, Omari. Any name that stands out a little bit more to you than the others with this?
Yeah, it seems like Oubre had a resurgence of the season. Like, Pistons fans know what Oubre can do. Like, I remember him been hitting 9 or 10 threes against the Pistons and just going on a heater the season before last. You know, a guy that they probably could have looked at signing. But I mean, yeah, as long as Oubre can still shoot the ball, I say why not? Man, that's kind of the tune I've had this entire episode. But any wing between the heights of 6'5" and 6'10" that can shoot the ball, fit the Pistons, and if they can defend, then that's even better. So all those guys, Taurean Prince, like, you look at all those guys.
Yeah, I mean, somebody said, like, just draft Dalton Connect. Like, I agree. Yeah, like, draft somebody like Dalton Connect, whatever, add them to the roster. I think it's going to take more than one. I don't think you can walk out like with 122, even though Connect's an older draft pick. I don't think you can walk into next season and I wouldn't feel great that this team's going to really take step forwards. You know, we talked about the Monty Williams thing earlier. I get it. I understand it. We don't have to get into that right now. And I wasn't defending Monty. I was just saying that the roster could use some growth. And I still believe that no matter what. Last one here. How do you see team building changing now that the new CBA is fully in effect? Is the era of star chasing and player empowerment over? I think what I'm most interested, Omari, are some of these guys not going to get paid? Like, what's going to happen? Are that, someone like BI who I think would probably get the max in, the previous era. Like, we saw the Suns are in a tough spot, Omari. I know Ishbia came out and said that that only 3 teams would, not trade their situation with them. I don't think that that's right, but it really limits you in what you can do when you're over that second apron. And so I think you have to be careful about who you give these maxes to. So I just wonder if some guys aren't going to get contracts they would have otherwise because of that.
Yeah, I'm curious. Like, honestly, I'm still like TBD on a lot of this. Like, I still think teams are actively, figuring out a lot of those things this offseason, just given that it's tougher to swing or, the mechanisms to swing those types of, trades just are going to be more restricted depending on the team's financial picture. So it could strengthen free agency again. I wish I had a better answer for that. Like, I am curious. This is an off season of data, I think, for the new CBA, and I'll be curious to see exactly how it impacts things.
All right. So again, thank you to everybody. Like, I know there was a ton of you. We didn't get to shout out your name. We didn't get to talk about your off season, all of that different stuff. So I really, really apologize if we didn't get to that. We got kind of settled in on a few and really got hung up on those. So thank you to everybody who supports. Thank you everybody who was here in the live chat. Whether we agree or disagree or whatever, we always appreciate you guys and enjoy the conversation, the debate, the back and forth. Again, like, subscribe, ratings, reviews, all of that. Appreciate you so much. Make sure you go listen to the Pin Down with Wes and Blake. And Omari, take it away, my guy.
No doubt. Quick addition to my usual outro. Anjanette Delgado, our executive producer, who's worked so closely with us at the Pistons Post to get this pod live, worked really closely with Gannett for us to host our live show. at Hopcat last year. She is departing the Free Press, so we had a going away ceremony and, send off for her this past weekend. So just wanted to say a big thanks to Anjanette for everything she's done behind the scenes to make this pod go. Like, she was really instrumental to our audio department, and we will absolutely miss you, Anjanette. So with that, big thanks to our audio producer, Robin Chen, our editor-in-chief, Avery Nicole Nichols, our executive producer, Anjanette Delgado, and our sports editor, Kirkland Crawford. And big shout out to Wes as always. And we will talk to you all next week.
YouTube user says, when you say beef, Bryce wants to know what cut and quality.
That's true.
That's exactly right. Whenever,
yeah.